It's the kind of news no fan ever wants to hear. At 66, country legend Alan Jackson, the man whose voice defined a generation, has quietly revealed he's saying goodbye. Not because he wants to, but because his body is forcing him to. For decades, Alan stood tall under the spotlight, a cowboy hat tilted just right, a guitar in hand and that voice calm yet commanding, that could bring both comfort and tears. Songs like Remember When, Chattahoochee, and Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning became more than music. They became the soundtrack to America's heart. But now, after a heartbreaking diagnosis, the country icon admits the stage that once gave him life has become a place of struggle. In his own words, "I've been living with something for years. It's getting harder to perform. I just don't want to fall on stage. This is not the ending anyone expected, but it's one written with courage, grace, and faith." Because Alan Jackson's story isn't just about fame. It's about facing life's hardest battles with the same humility that made him a legend. Before the fame, before the spotlight, Alan Eugene Jackson was just a small-town Georgia boy with a guitar and a dream. Born in 1958 in Noonan, Georgia, Alan grew up the youngest of 5 children in a modest home built around love, hard work, and gospel songs on Sunday mornings. His early life was simple. No luxury, no fame, just family and faith. He worked odd jobs, sang in church, and spent hours strumming his guitar on the porch, dreaming of one day hearing his voice on the radio. When he moved to Nashville in the early 80s with his wife, Denise, they had almost nothing, no connections, no money, just belief. Denise worked as a flight attendant and once met Glenn Campbell on a plane. That chance encounter led to Alan's first real opportunity in the country music capital. It wasn't easy. For years he faced rejection after rejection. But Alan wasn't the type to give up. His songs came from the heart, real stories about real people. And when Here in the Real World hit the charts in 1990, the world finally heard the voice they'd been missing. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing truth. And that's what made him different. Throughout the 90s and early 2000s, Alan Jackson became the voice of the working man, honest, humble, and grounded. While others leaned into trends, he stayed true to his roots, honoring the classic country sound that raised him. His music spoke to generations: love, loss, faith, and family. Songs like Drive for Daddy Gene and Remember When didn't just top charts. They touched souls. And as his fame grew, Alan never changed. Offstage, he remained the same quiet Southern gentleman, devoted to Denise, proud of his daughters, grateful for every blessing. But beneath the calm smile, life began to change in ways fans couldn't see. Behind the music, Alan was silently fighting a battle that would one day force him to slow down, a battle he could no longer hide. For years, Alan Jackson seemed unstoppable. Every concert sold out. Every song struck a chord with fans who saw him as one of their own. On stage, he stood tall, a cowboy hat, a gentle smile, a voice that never wavered. But behind the curtain, something was changing. Fans began to notice subtle signs: a slower walk, a missed step, a hand gripping the microphone stand for balance. Most thought it was age, maybe exhaustion. But the truth was far more heartbreaking. In 2021, Alan Jackson revealed to the world that he had been battling Charcot-Marie tooth disease, a rare neurological disorder that affects muscle strength and balance. It's hereditary and there's no cure. The disease slowly weakens the body's ability to move, to stand, to walk. For a man who spent his life performing, it was devastating news. He admitted, "I've been dealing with this for years. It's getting worse. I just don't want to fall on stage." Those words cut deep, not just for fans, but for Alan himself. The stage was his second home. The music was his lifeblood. To step back felt like losing a part of who he was. But Alan handled it with the same quiet grace that defined his entire career. There were no dramatic announcements, no headlines begging for sympathy, just honesty. He told fans the truth because they'd always been part of his story. As he continued touring, he began to adapt. The bright lights now hid a man struggling to stay steady. Yet every time he took the stage, his voice remained strong, steady, soulful, filled with emotion. Even as his legs betrayed him, his spirit never did. During his final tours, fans often wept seeing him push through pain to deliver every song with meaning. When he sang "Remember When," his voice trembled not from weakness, but from the weight of knowing those words now held new meaning. Behind the scenes, his wife Denise, his lifelong partner, stood by him just as she always had. Through every setback, every stumble, she became his strength. Alan once said, "Denise has been my rock. She believed in me before the world did, and she still does." For Alan, the hardest part wasn't the illness. It was knowing there would come a day when he couldn't perform anymore. When the crowd would cheer, but he'd no longer be strong enough to step out and sing. Doctors advised him to slow down, to rest. And reluctantly, Alan listened. His family, especially his daughters, encouraged him to prioritize his health over his career. It wasn't an easy choice. For a man whose life had been defined by music, walking away felt like saying goodbye to an old friend. But even as he stepped off the stage, he promised fans that his music and his heart would never fade. He said softly in one interview, "I'm not dying. I'm just learning to live differently." Those words summed up the man perfectly, humble, strong, and grounded in faith. Alan Jackson's journey wasn't over. It was simply changing direction, from stages and stadiums to something deeper, reflection, gratitude, and legacy. And as the lights dimmed and the final chords faded, Alan knew one truth remained unshaken. His voice would live on long after the music stopped. As Alan Jackson's health struggles became known, fans across the world held their breath. The idea of losing his voice, the soundtrack to their lives, felt almost unbearable. But in true Alan Jackson fashion, he refused to let his story end in sadness. Instead, he turned his farewell into a celebration. When he announced his last call, one more for the road tour, the world listened. Every ticket sold out in hours. Fans from all generations, from those who grew up with "Don't Rock the Jukebox" to those who discovered "Remember When" on streaming platforms, came together to say goodbye. It wasn't just another tour. It was a love letter, from Alan to his fans, and from his fans right back to him. Night after night, under golden stage lights, Alan stood tall, microphone in hand, sometimes leaning on a stool when his legs grew tired. But his voice was as strong as ever, deep, steady, filled with emotion that only decades of living could create. Between songs, he'd smile that gentle smile, tip his hat, and thank the crowd for standing by him through every chapter. "I don't know how long I'll keep doing this," he'd say softly, "but as long as I can stand here and sing for y'all, I will." Those words would bring tears every time. At one show in Nashville, the audience rose to their feet as he performed "Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning?" The crowd sang every word back to him, 1,000 voices echoing the pain, hope, and healing of a song that once united a nation. Alan couldn't hold back the emotion. His voice cracked slightly, but he finished strong, wiping away tears before smiling through the applause. That's who he was. Not just a singer, but a storyteller. A man who never chased fame but found it through honesty. Backstage, surrounded by his family, Alan often spoke about gratitude. He'd say, "I'm lucky. I got to live my dream, and the good Lord still lets me sing it." As his tour continued, his condition made travel and performing harder. Some nights, the pain was visible, the effort of staying balanced, the slow, careful steps. But the moment the music began, it was as if time reversed. The disease could take his strength, but it could never touch his spirit. Each concert felt like a goodbye wrapped in grace. Fans brought signs that read, "We love you, Alan," and "Thank you for the memories." Many said it felt like watching a friend take one final bow. When he performed "Remember When" in his closing shows, the meaning was crystal clear. The song, once a tender reflection on love and time, now felt like Alan's personal message to the world. Remember when the sound of little feet was the music we danced to week. He sang softly, his voice trembling, and the audience wept. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was connection. Real, timeless, and human. By the end of each night, he'd look out at the crowd, tip his hat one last time, and whisper, God bless y'all. And with that, Alan Jackson, the humble Georgia boy who rose to become one of country music's greatest legends, walked slowly off stage, the lights fading behind him. It wasn't just the end of a concert. It was the end of an era. But for millions of fans around the world, it wasn't goodbye. It was, see you down the road. The stage lights may have dimmed, but Alan Jackson's legacy continues to shine brighter than ever. His voice, steady, soulful, unmistakably honest, still echoes through radios, jukeboxes, and the hearts of millions who grew up with his music. When Alan finally stepped away from touring, it wasn't a farewell out of defeat, it was an act of grace. After more than 4 decades of performing, he wanted to leave his fans with memories of strength, not struggle. And though the world knew about his battle with Charcot-Marie tooth disease, he refused to let it define him. In interviews, Alan often smiled gently and said, "It's not the end. It's just a different chapter." That's the kind of man he's always been, humble in victory, strong in hardship, faithful in all things. Away from the spotlight, Alan has found peace in the simple life he's always loved. At his home in Tennessee, surrounded by rolling fields and the quiet hum of nature, he spends his days with his wife Denise and their daughters, enjoying the moments fame once stole from him. He still writes songs, sometimes just for himself, sometimes for others, melodies born from reflection, faith, and gratitude. Music has always been his way of speaking to the world, and even now, that voice hasn't gone silent. His faith, always his guiding compass, remains unshaken. Alan has said many times that he believes every hardship, every triumph, and every tear was part of God's plan. "You can't always change what happens to you," he said, "but you can choose how you live through it." And that's what makes his story so powerful. It's not just about fame, or awards, or record sales. It's about a man who stayed true to who he was, no matter how bright the lights or how heavy the burdens. Alan Jackson's music will live on not because it was popular, but because it was real. His songs didn't just entertain, they comforted, they healed, they reminded people of home, family, and the small joys that make life worth living. From Drive to Remember When, from Gone Country to Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning, each lyric carries a piece of the man behind the music, honest, heartfelt, and grounded. You can still see the spark in his eyes when he talks about the old days, his first guitar, the early gigs, the fans who stood by him through everything. "If I never sang another note," he once said, "I'd still be thankful for the life I've had." In an industry where fame often fades fast, Alan Jackson remains timeless. His influence can be heard in countless younger artists who grew up inspired by his authenticity and storytelling. To them, Alan isn't just a legend, he's a teacher, a symbol of what it means to be real in a world that often forgets how. And to the millions who have loved him for decades, he'll always be more than a country singer. He's the voice of life itself, love, loss, faith, and endurance. Though his touring days are over, his journey isn't. It continues every time someone presses play on an old song, every time a father teaches his child Chattahoochee, every time a crowd sings "Remember When" together under the stars. Alan Jackson may have said goodbye to the stage, but his spirit, his words, and his music will never say goodbye to us. Because legends like him don't fade, they just find new ways to shine.